So could you go ahead and tell me where and when you were born?
Do it again, huh? Okay.
Yes.
South Carolina, Union County, a little town called Lakeview, in 1921, June 24.
All right. So what conflicts did you serve in?
Well, I have been in the Coast Guard continuously since 1943, I guess, is when my commission service started. I enlisted in 1940 at age 18. And the only period that I had outside of that was almost 4 years at the University of South Carolina, where I pursued a degree in civil engineering. But my employment history up until I was retired was strictly in the Coast Guard, and that involved World War II, which I served during the whole period of World War II, and we'll be discussing what was going on then a little bit more.
All right.
And before that, I was in support service during the Vietnam conflict, and also I served in the Philippines during the Korean conflict. So my duties during those periods, I guess, we'll be covering later.
All right. So what was your rank and grade?
Well, I started off as an apprentice seaman, which is the very bottom of the scale, and wound up captain in the Coast Guard, which is the, in terms of numbers, it's 06 in the military terms. It's the same as colonels in the Army and
Oh,
the
wow.
Marine Corps. So that was my final rank in the Coast Guard.
All right. And then could you tell me where you were stationed, like the different locations?
Okay, now there we run into something that's going to take a little time. I had continental assignments in the lower 48 states because we only had 48 back in those days.
Oh, wow. Which ones did we not have?
Well, I served in Alaska when it was a territory, and also in Hawaii when it was a territory. My daughter was born in the territory of Alaska, and my young son used to think she was an Eskimo. But for continental assignments, I started out with what we term as boot camp in Baltimore at the Coast Guard Yard there, and I was immediately assigned to Key West, Florida, and there we spent our time cleaning buoys and doing anything else that a young 18-year-old seaman would be required to do, which was pretty dirty work.
Oh, I bet.
But later on I served in Savannah, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina, Elizabeth City, North Carolina, St. Louis, Missouri. I was there twice. And Norfolk, Virginia, Portsmouth, Virginia, I served in that area twice. In Washington 3 times, in Long Beach, California, and in Boston. Those are all continental. And then the places outside the United States was an extended period in Labrador. I was there for over a year. During most of World War II, I was in Labrador as CEO of a radio station and a LORAN station, which is a navigational aid for pilots and ships at sea. And the outside the continent, I was stationed, of course, for 3 years in Alaska and a similar period in the Pacific with my base in Honolulu.
Oh, wow.
So it's they spread me around, and they didn't leave me in one place very long. the average assignment for me was probably closer to 2 years than it was 3.
Wow.
But I had a couple of assignments that were 3 years and maybe one that was 4. But that was later on when, I don't know why they became generous.
Yes. Later on. So you said that you enlisted first and then you later earned your commission, right?
Yeah.
So what made you decide to become a commissioned officer?
Well, I spent, as an 18-year-old, I had not finished college. I had finished high school, but I entered the Coast Guard because at that point in time, World War II was beginning to heat up and the drafts were starting. I was not drafted. The Coast Guard never never participated in the draft. We didn't draft people. Everybody in the Coast Guard who enlisted had to be at least a high school graduate. So I had hoped to go to Georgia Tech and major in chemistry, but after I got into service, everything changed then because I was hooked up with all the military activities that were developing.
Oh, yeah.
So did I come close to your question, or did I miss some of your?
Yeah, so why did you decide to become an officer after enlisting?
Oh, you mean after I was enlisted?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. I always had my eye on advancement, and I didn't have any particular goal in mind at age 18, but I knew I didn't want to stay a seaman in the Coast Guard all my life. So what I did, I enrolled in everything I could think of for training courses. And the first one I enrolled in was to be a radio operator, and I did. I was accepted for that. I spent 6 months training as a radio operator, and as a part of that, they also taught typing. So I became a pretty good typist and a good radio operator, and I was sent to sea then aboard a ship on anti-submarine patrol. That was combat duty. We dropped a lot of depth charges off North and South Carolina. But during that period, I was assigned to the Fleet Sound School, which is a sonar school. It was being operated by the Navy in Key West, Florida. And I got advanced training in maintaining that type of equipment. And then one course led to another, and when I finished my sea duty, well, actually, you never finish it, but I spent a number of months doing that. I was assigned to the Capitol Radio Engineering Institute here in Washington and finished the course there. And upon completing that, I was assigned to the Naval Research Lab for an extended period in electronics. And then, where did I go? I attended a school that the Coast Guard was conducting at Mystic, Connecticut, training officers in the aids to navigation system, the flashers on buoys, the bells on buoys,
Oh, yes.
the lighthouses and how they're operated, and the flashers and the lights in the lighthouses. So I finished that course, and one course led to another, and finally I had progressed pretty rapidly to be a first-class petty officer, and that usually takes several years, but I don't know, I jumped in one place to another.
Wow.
I did it pretty fast. So I applied for officer candidate training, and I asked my supervisor at that point in time if he would recommend me for OCS, and he said, sure, says, write your letter of recommendation and I'll sign it tomorrow, and that's what I did.
Wow. That's amazing.
So I recommended myself for a commission in the Coast Guard, and my boss signed it, and I was on the way to OCS.
That's so funny.
And when I finished OCS, I was just barely 21 years old, and my first set of orders shocked me because they assigned me to MIT for Loren training, and upon completion of that training, I was to proceed to Battle Harbor, Labrador, as the commanding officer at age 21.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
Of a Navy advanced base. And when I got there, I found that I was the youngest guy in the whole station. And I had a crew there of about 30 guys, and we were isolated there during the rest of World War II on shores of Labrador.
Wow.
And after that, I found my way back to South Carolina in the USC and finished a degree in civil engineering, upon which I went to Denver for employment with the Reclamation Bureau. Well, I still wanted to be in the Coast Guard, and I had never given any thought about contacting the Coast Guard for getting back in and just picking up my old commission. I had a commission in the reserve at that time. So I just, one night I was sitting by my bed and I had some postcards that I wrote. It just penny postcards. And I wrote one to Coast Guard headquarters, and I just asked a question. I said, "Do you have any vacancies in the regular Coast Guard for civil engineers?" And I got a letter back with, in a brown envelope. It said, "Subject to passing a physical examination and confirmation by the Senate, you are appointed," and gave me my old rank back. And I grabbed it real quick. I took my physical examination, resigned from the Reclamation Bureau, and I jumped on a National Guard plane and came back to Washington and started my career again.
Wow.
So everything turned out, I don't know, it wasn't all planned in the initial concept, but everything that I hoped would happen in some way came to fruition, and I wound up with a lot of good jobs, and it ended with the top job in civil engineering in the Coast Guard as a captain. So I figure I had it. It may not be the right term, but I almost had an elite career because
Yes.
I never had to work with a supervisor or a boss that was on my back about anything. Never got to shoot out for anything. I did my job, and it turned out to be acceptable. And here I am at Ashby.
That's incredible. All right. So did you meet any like major people who influenced your career?
You know, I've thought about that a lot. I don't think any particular individual had a big impact on my career, because I always had in the back of my mind what goals I wanted to establish, and I just tried to prepare myself to get in that position where I would be accepted for a job that I thought I could handle, and it turned out that everything turned out in my favor. So I have nothing but good thoughts about my career and being in the Coast Guard for all those years.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right. So do you remember your first impressions?
My
of
first
the
impression?
Coast Guard? Mm-hmm.
Well, my first impression as a seaman, I was shipped from boot camp to Key West base, and all I saw was a bunch of buoys out on the base there that were covered with barnacles, and a bunch of guys out there with chipping hammers knocking these barnacles off these buoys and wire brushing them and getting them cleaned up to put back in the water. And I knew that was going to be a part of my life if I didn't do something to get out of it. So one thing just led to another.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I guess it changed everyone's career at that time, every young guy, is the advent of World War II. Things were taking place that we had no concern over. The Coast Guard was getting more active. The ships were being modified to have sonar, which is submarine detection equipment, installed. We became a quick part of that, and I was assigned to a ship which happened to be stationed in Key West while we taught Navy sailors to be sonar operators. Most people don't realize that, but the Coast Guard, during periods of wartime or national emergency, it functions as a part of the United States Navy at the direction of the President. So by that time, we had been really absorbed in the Navy, just as a branch like the Marine Corps. Marine Corps is in the Navy too. everything in the Marine Corps is the U.S. Navy. It's not just U.S. Marine Corps. They belong to the Navy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way the Coast Guard was during World War II. We became a part of the Navy.
Oh, wow, I had no idea
Yeah,
that
that's the reason
happens.
my initial orders to this advanced base in Labrador, it was the U.S. Navy advanced base, number 228. That was our only address. And we couldn't get any mail or anything. Everything had to be sent to a secure post office in New York City, and then it was sent to us by usually a plane flying over and dropping it to us.
Wow.
All right, so you talked a little bit about the places that you went with the Coast Guard. What like specific assignments were you given?
Specific assignments? Well, most of my assignments were, well, after I came back in, they were all civil engineering assignments. And one of them happened to be with a large cargo ship which was operated in the Pacific to service all the Loran stations in the whole Pacific area. And I was assigned to that ship as the civil engineering officer aboard the ship.
Oh, wow.
Well, our ship was loaded up with landing crafts, boats that could land on the surf. We had bulldozers, we had cherry pickers, and cranes, and all kinds of construction equipment, which I had to take care of when we landed somewhere. We'd land on an island, say on Iwo Jima, and we'd put our boats in the water, and it would load them up with construction equipment, take them ashore, and do whatever work was required, and we'd reload it, and we'd go to another island and do the same thing. And that was one of the choice assignments in the Coast Guard at that time, was aboard the Kukui. That was the name. There'll be a picture of it in that book over there. And it was a large ship. It was about 10 yards longer than a football field, so it was a big ship. And that was something I never expected to be at sea as a civil engineer. Since they sent all the construction equipment along with me, it turned out great.
You didn't have to do it all by yourself?
No.
All right, so what was one thing that you experienced that you never expected going into the Coast Guard?
Well, I never looked at that because my expectations didn't go that far in the future. My expectations were short range, and I had short goals, and I hoped that I'd meet those goals, and then once I got there, I would decide what my next step might be or could be. And I just approached my career as a series of goals rather than one long-term goal. I never dreamed that when I came back in the Coast Guard that I would be the chief of civil engineering for the whole Coast Guard.
Wow.
That wasn't in my plan.
Mm-hmm.
That just developed as I completed assignments in the Coast Guard.
All right. So what do you think was the most impactful like job or assignment you had?
Well, the most, so many of them were significant. I was in charge of the program which started providing housing for our enlisted personnel and our officers too. We started building our own houses. When I went in the Coast Guard, no one was provided housing. If he was an officer, he lived in the community. And I never lived in government quarters the whole time I was in the service.
Wow.
Never did I occupy a government-owned house for my family. But when I left, we were providing houses for practically all of our enlisted and mobile personnel. But as far as jobs are concerned, well, a lot of them really, I enjoyed being involved with redesigning and rebuilding a major runway at Elizabeth City Air Station. That airstrip was over a mile long, and we tore the old strip up, put a brand new one down, redesigned it to fit all the current standards for lighting. And during that period too, you've heard of these Texas towers down in the Gulf where the oil industry has rigs out in the Gulf of Mexico. They're all over the place. There are dozens of them, and they're way offshore. And they're, I'm pretty sure I don't have a picture of one of those there. But they're sitting out in the ocean, and they're aids to navigation, really where we used to maintain a light ship. As your ships approach the United States coast, historically there was a light ship anchored maybe 30 or 40 miles offshore, say Cape Hatteras in North Carolina, which is a very famous light. They had a light ship there. They also had a lighthouse. Well, we designed and had constructed these offshore structures, they call them, up and down the East Coast during my watch, and that was a big project, which was a lot of fun to be involved with. And I don't really have one favorite. I guess I'd have to say the runway job was more fun than the rest of them, because that way I could see the planes coming in every day after we got the new runway in.
Oh wow, that's really cool.
You know, and the shores, the structures that we put 20 miles at sea, I could make one trip out there, maybe on a helicopter when they commissioned it, and then that's the last time I ever saw it. The guys operating on the ships, they were using it, but I never saw it. But the runway, I could see the guys using that. I was the public works officer in Elizabeth City during my career, and I could see everything that was going on. So I got a kick out of that, but enjoyed it.
Oh, so were there any big differences that you noticed, like in between conflicts? Because you said you served during World War II and Vietnam, right?
Yeah. I don't know. One of the most significant ones is how that the female players, you might say, became active on active duty. When I entered the service, there were no women in the Coast Guard at all. But by the time I left, into my retirement, they were actually serving as commanding officers of some of our ships.
Oh wow!
And they were not being no judgmental factors were against them. The career was wide open to the females, and they took advantage of it, and they almost took over. So that was one of the biggest changes. And another was the internationalization of the Coast Guard use. It used to be that most of our ships, or all of our ships, were involved in maintaining aids to navigation up around all the rivers, the Mississippi River, the Ohio River, all the rivers and ports and harbors in the United States. And we also maintained every lighthouse. That was under my jurisdiction too. The lighthouses, the ladies here like the lighthouse business. I don't know why. They have T-shirts with lighthouses and jackets with lighthouses. So I got a kick out of seeing that, because that was once a part of my life. But when the Vietnam conflict started, for some reason the Navy wanted to have some ships that were not big battleships involved in the conflicts over there. So they transferred a bunch of destroyer escorts, they're a little bit smaller than the regular destroyers. They assigned those to the Coast Guard, and then zap, they went straight over to Vietnam. So they did us a favor. They gave us ships, but then they told us where to take them. And the same thing in the Arabic part of the world. We've had a lot of ships involved in traffic over there with the Iranians during my post-retirement. They're very active in the Middle East area. So I think the international aspects of the Coast Guard have changed from what they were, and the staffing in the offices has certainly changed. And I think those are probably two of the biggest changes that So, which were both beneficial to the taxpayer and should have been done earlier probably.
Yes. So when you were overseas, what was that experience like?
Well, I was pretty much confined to the property they were on, but in cases like the Philippines and then when I was in Labrador, that was a part of Newfoundland at that time, and of course Newfoundland now is a part of Canada, so it goes way back. There were quite a few grub stakers, they call them. They were these Irish people who had settled in Newfoundland, and in the summer they would migrate up to Labrador and spend the summer fishing. And there was a little town of Battle Harbor, which was within a few miles of our station. They were frozen in the winter also. And I made an effort to maintain contact with the local, well, they weren't tribesmen, but they were people who were grub stakers. They had a claim to the lands up there in Labrador. I tried to keep in close contact with the ones who I considered to be the alpha people in the clan, so it would maintain good relations with the Coast Guard. And about all we could do was maybe invite them in to a movie once in a while. You know, we would do that in the winter when they could use their dog teams to come to our place. And that was always fun because they'd have a bunch of dog teams tied up outside, and the dog teams would start fighting each other.
Oh no.
Sometimes we had a problem with the dog team, more than we did the people. But I thought it was important to maintain good public relations with the people who lived in the area. They thought that the Coast Guard people were kind of special because the government had sent us there with a lot of palaver. And especially in the Philippines, I made it a real priority to maintain contact with the politicians that ran the island, because before I even got off the ship, when they landed me there, I had a message that the governor of the island wanted to see me before they started work. And he wanted to tell me that he didn't want any Japanese contractors on his island because they had been occupied during the World War by Japanese. And
Wow.
it turned out that the contractor that was coming from Honolulu to do our job, every one of them was Japanese.
Oh no.
So it was a little bit of rough period there when we had to convince them that these aren't real Japanese, these are Americans. They just look like Japanese. So that worked out real well, and they also had a constabulary there, which consisted of a small element of the Philippine Army. And they were headed by a major who exercised a lot of power, and I made sure I was his friend because he was real good to the Coast Guard. And the other faction, the third faction on the island, was the Catholic Church. They had a monastery there, and all the priests from Spain, and every one of them wanted to contact the Coast Guard guy and squeeze him out of all the money they could so they could go over to Hong Kong and trade the money, American dollars, for whatever they could get in Hong Kong.
Oh, wow.
So it was kind of tenuous to be among those conflicts that existed among themselves. We didn't want to become a part of the conflict. So I'd have lunch at the monastery sometime, and I'd go to lunch with the major another day, and the politician, the governor, just drop in his office and say hi. But it was important that the Coast Guard not stir up anything that might be deleterious, I guess is the right word, for the Coast Guard's reputation in that area. And we did have conflicts with some of these young guys that had been assigned as COs of our Loran stations. They were all on islands throughout the Pacific, and all these islands had chiefs. Every one of them did. And sometimes you'd get a young Coast Guard officer who thought he had more power on the island than the chief did, and he found out that wasn't the case. So we had a few conflicts, but I never got in that. I didn't have any problem with that. So as far as any social activity, there wasn't anything available as far as I could find.
Did you have, I know you said the Coast Guard was part of the Navy during World War II, but did you have any contact with any of the other branches?
Occasionally, in my trip from to Baffin Island, I was in charge of a construction of a station on Baffin Island, which is a northern Canadian coast on the Atlantic side, right across the sea from Greenland. This Baffin Bay is in there, and my transportation was provided by a Navy ship, the O'Brien out of Norfolk. I did go up there on a Navy ship, and we also had a relationship with the Canadian Mounted Police because they had a Canadian Mountie assigned to my station to make sure that if anybody wanted to take a bear skin back, for instance, they made sure that they bought a permit from him. And believe it or not, the Mountie, he lived in a Quonset hut with me. He was over this side, I was on this side. So we were good buddies. But he had certain requirements that they imposed on him. That he had to keep in contact with the native population, and we were at the same time building him a special residence alongside our Lorraine station. So the presence of the Canadian Mounted Police would always exist, even though we were providing the accommodation for him there.
Oh, okay.
So I had that relationship, which was a good one, but it was kind of humorous that his supervisory people required him to stand in front of our construction detachment once a week and have his picture made. He would offer himself for photographs. But he had to have his full uniform on now, way up in the Arctic where there's nothing but bears and seals.
Oh, wow.
And Eskimos. So we didn't have a lot of, other than support from the ships, we didn't have any, well, I better rephrase that a little bit. Technically, I was assigned to the commander of that area up there. That North Atlantic area was under the control of a Navy admiral who was stationed in Argentia, Newfoundland. That was called Task Force 24. That was his title. And he was in charge of all the ships and planes and anything else, all the activities that took place in that northern region. And I was considered one of his staff officers, although I never even met him. On paper, I was on his staff.
Wow.
So he knew where I was, I knew where he was, and he never had any questions, and I never had any answers for him. So it was just a paperwork. I was just one of many of his units up there.
Wow. All right. Right, so what kind of challenges did you face during your time in the Coast Guard?
Well, I don't think I had any personal challenges. Occasionally you had problems with a construction project. They were a challenge. For instance, when we were building offshore structures in the Atlantic, we were constructing one off Cape Hatteras, and we had a contractor who was to take this large section of the tower's base on a big barge and a big crane to lift it. He was transporting it down to the site, and it fell overboard out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
No.
So we spent some time retrieving that from the bottom of the Atlantic so we could continue with this project. But I don't know, everything worked out.
All right.
Every challenge turned out to be, in hindsight, a lot of fun working with. Challenges weren't always something that drove you nuts. Challenges sometimes made you happy because it gave you something to do, and you really think you've done something when you got the problem solved.
That's great. All right. So, did you end up having like a post-military service job, or did you retire right after the Coast Guard?
Well, I had not spent much time thinking about my post-military career because financially it didn't seem to be a problem. But I had two kids that were going through college, so I figured, what the heck, might as well accumulate a few dollars to take care of that problem and not drain my own resources too much. So I did think about a job in construction management. Well, I happened to be in Vienna, Virginia, living there at the time, and all this metro work was in progress, and they were full of civil engineers. And it was one of the prime contractors in the United States, Bechtel Corporation. Well, I just, I don't know how I worked that, but anyway, I got an invitation from Bechtel to come in for an interview on my last week of active duty. I was on leave, so I could still go in and interview. And I immediately took a job as the cost and schedule manager with Bechtel Corporation for all that metro work. It was going to tunnels and rail system, the whole thing. So I wound up with a nice position in my retirement. I kept that for about 10 years and then retired again. So everything worked out for me. I don't think I was just always in the right place at the right time.
Oh, that's great. So, do you think you learned any specific like skills or anything that carried into your post-service life in the Coast Guard? So, did you learn any like skills or anything in the Coast Guard that helped you in the rest of your life?
Well, I think the largest, or one of the largest problems, or I don't know how to phrase this, but personnel management is a real chore for anybody in management. I don't care what kind of specialty you're operating, whether it's civil engineering or computer programming or what. You always have people that they want to be advanced too. And a lot of times there's conflict among the employees when I can recall one person when I had to make a selection who would be managing a particular office, and the number two guy was very much disappointed, and he got kind of ticked off that he was not accepted for the job. And I'd say personnel management is probably one of the least enjoyable factors of any professional life. There's no one answer to it. You just be reasonable.
Mm-hmm. So that's definitely something like that appeals to every job, right? Personal.
Yeah, but I think the key to personnel management is having a good position description, and then whatever items that are listed as duties in there, have a sub unit over here telling how he performs that duty and what's expected of him in performing that duty. And if he goes down the list and performs all his duties the way he's supposed to perform, he's a good employee. And frankly, you don't find a lot of them who stand out in the crowd. It's not too hard to know who the people are that are really supporting your program.
That's good. So back to when you were overseas, were there any like unusual experiences that you had that kind of impacted you?
Most of those experiences I had were not related to my duty, Coast Guard duties.
Mm-hmm.
but there are things that just happened. For instance, in Honolulu, I was rear-ended by a grandmama with her little daughter who was going to Sunday school one morning to an automobile accident. I was engaged in an air rage incident when a plane was forced down over Bangor, Maine, coming from London on a flight. And I was aboard a Norwegian cruise ship, and we rammed into a Chinese container ship in
Wow.
over the channel. So it land, sea, and air collisions.
They followed you.
None of it had anything to do with the Coast Guard.
That's crazy.
He's just coming and going. But it was really fun in Bangor, Maine. We had been subjected to a rowdy pastor who was sitting behind us, my wife and I. And it resulted in the guy making some pretty severe threats against my life, and everybody could hear it. And the pilot came back and evaluated the situation, and he said, well, we got to land. And he landed at Bangor, Maine, and had the guy removed. And when the plane stopped and they opened it up, on the tarmac, 6 guys came aboard, all dressed in black, mask, everything. Handcuffed this guy and taking him off the plane, and just as they got him off the plane, one said, welcome, sir, to Bangor, Maine.
Wow.
So that ended that. That was a fun day, though. Now, things like that are not even worth talking about. It's just things that happen.
So did you ever consider, like maybe joining a different branch or having a different path in your life? And how do you think that
You mean before
would have
I went
changed?
in?
Either like before or while you were in?
No, I don't think so. I had a brother who was an officer in the Navy, and there was some attraction to joining him in the Navy because we could maybe get on the same ship somewhere. But I never saw him during World War II. He was in the Pacific and I was in the Atlantic.
Oh wow.
So I was always pretty proud of being in the Coast Guard. I thought we had a good organization, and the Coast Guard's always been very popular with the politicians in the United States because we operate facilities that are in their districts, really, all over the United States. Because every lighthouse that you've ever seen or heard of is operated by the Coast Guard. And they're all being dimmed now and shut out because they're not needed anymore. They're being replaced by celestial navigation. But there was a big article in the Washington Post just this week about some lighthouse up in New England. They're spending a couple of $1 million to relocate it. It's just an old structure now. But the people are so wrapped up in the history of that lighthouse that they want to keep it. You know, about 5 years ago, they actually moved the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse almost a quarter of a mile.
Wow.
And that was a real engineering project. So that's the way it goes.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, what did you do in your, like, did you have any free time while you were on active service?
Well, I had leave every year. I could take leave, and I always managed to squeeze that in. But in travel assignments, I had a lot of travel assignments. For instance, if I were going to visit a station in the Mediterranean, I had an office in London operating out of the embassy there with a guy who was in charge of the stations in Germany and France and Italy and Spain and all the Mediterranean areas. So I would always stop there and pick up a guy, and he'd go with me because he knew more about it than I did. So I try to manage my departure from here so that I would arrive there late on a Friday or a Saturday morning, so I'd have Saturday and Sunday to visit the museums and see what was available.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to see quite a bit of stuff just by planning my visits in the United States. But you don't get to find out much about the culture with little short visits like that. I found after I retired, I took a bunch of these river cruises up and down the Rhine and the Danube River. And on those, they are arranged so you can go out and visit with a farmer in his house
Wow.
and have dinner with him and see how he actually lives. So I did a few of those. But that was after I retired, though. But it was all because I had been in the Coast Guard, I was able to do that. But it's, while on active duty, you don't have much spare time.
Mm-hmm.
And I know on construction projects in particular, you spend a lot of hours at home preparing for the next day's work. So that's all part of the job.
Mm-hmm. So going off of the traveling while in the Coast Guard, what was your favorite place that you visited or were stationed?
Well, for a vacation,
For your time in the Coast Guard.
well, actually, the best destination just as a visit while I was traveling would probably be London. I really enjoyed London, and I had once when I finished up in the Philippines, the commander in the Philippines was so happy about the job being finished that he offered to let me come home he said, I'm gonna send you either to Hong Kong or Tokyo. And so I told him, let's go to Tokyo. So I spent a few days in Tokyo. He just wrote me a set of orders to proceed to Tokyo for, I don't know, some kind of duty, which was, I never did anything when I got there except travel around. And that was I did about a week there and came on back home.
Oh wow. All right. So do you remember what dates your service ended?
What?
What dates your service ended?
Yeah, it was 1 March 1975. Now, I have a piece of paper there on that table I was going to give you. It's just a list of names. Just one of the,
This one?
yeah. The month before I retired, they had a continuation board, which is a board that evaluated all the senior captains in the Coast Guard that had 30 years service. And it was either, they had a program of 30 years and out, but they had a board to see who they would like to keep. And 1 month, even after I put in my letter to retire, my name is on the list for retention.
Wow.
And I was number 2 on the list when I retired for the Coast Guard.
Wow.
They didn't want to let you go.
That's crazy.
But I thought that was kind of funny to get a letter retaining me when I'd already said I'm going to leave.
That's
And
great.
you said here that they wanted you even though you'd had 34 plus years, and that no academy officers with 30
That's
years
right.
were selected.
It's a kind of one-upmanship there on that one.
So what was your experience like after you decided to retire from the Coast Guard, and what did you do?
It was an overnight thing, over a weekend really. I retired on a Friday, my last, I'll put it this way, my last Friday before the 1st of March, I was negotiating with Bechtel to come to work the following Monday. So I didn't even miss a work day there from the time the date of my retirement and my employment with Bechtel. It was just the next day.
Wow, that's crazy. So you just switched
So
over.
I didn't have to send any resumes or I had one interview with them when they called me in for an interview, and that was it.
So everything went really smoothly for
Yeah,
you.
yeah, it was good.
That's fantastic. All right. So, what influence do you think your experience in the Coast Guard had on your job there?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
So, your experiences in the Coast Guard, what do you think you drawed out of that to help you in your post-service job?
How much did my Coast Guard assignments help me in my retirement job?
Yes.
Well, it was basically it was almost a continuation of related experience, slightly modified, because with this job I had with Bechtel, it was as a cost and schedule manager was the title, and that's an area that I was familiar with, but I hadn't spent 100% of my time in the cost and management business. And what that says, cost and management, I had a group that I was assigned to in Bechtel, who had the responsibility for evaluating every change in every contract on that whole metro system. If it was a claim for additional time on the contract, I had a bunch of guys who would evaluate the contractor's claim and see on what basis he was claiming additional time or money and money. And I would prepare an evaluation which the contracting officer would have to use in order to initiate a change order for that contractor. So we were in the middle. We determined how much the contractor was entitled to, both in time and money, and sent it to the contracting officer. And if they couldn't agree with the contractor, their next step was to go into federal court, and a federal judge would decide, based on the facts that we had presented, whether the contractor was entitled or not. So, in effect, we were standing between the contractor's claim and the taxpayer who was going to pay the bills, to make sure that the taxpayer paid a fair amount, but not an unreasonable amount to the contractor to protect the money. So there were other people in the Coast Guard who were doing that for me, and I wasn't really involved in negotiating these terms while I was in the Coast Guard.
Mm-hmm.
But Bechtel had a good staff of people and perfectly competent to do it. I enjoyed working with them.
That's great. So those are most of the questions I had. I was wondering if you had anything that you wanted to add or maybe talk about.
No, I think you've done a good job of picking it out. I would just, in hindsight, say that I had a real good career in the Coast Guard. I had a more than a good career in the Coast Guard, and I achieved more than I thought I ever would. And I don't boast about anything I did, because all I did was what I was supposed to do. And I don't think that that continuation board, to me, is the most, that says it all for me. The fact that I was selected to stay on active duty when others would be kicked out.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And
That's amazing.
I don't go around bragging about it, but at least that's to me a good indication that my service was satisfactory. I'll just put it that way.
I think way more than satisfactory.
So I was able to put my son and daughter through college, and he's a retired attorney and traveling all over the country now, spending money on photography. But he spends a lot of his time addressing photographic groups all over, up and down the coast. He has, he's taken a lot of people to Alaska and on these trips just as their guide, you might say, to accompany them while they try to photograph eagles. And there are different groups of people that are interested in that. There's one group, they're only interested in the aurora.
Really? That's it? They only want to see that?
They just want to go up to some place in Alaska. They stay up there sometime all winter long, just photographing the aurora borealis.
Wow.
And there's another group, they're only interested in photographing the eagles and the birds.
Very specific.
And then there's the other group, they're only interested in whales.
Wow.
And you'd be surprised.
I bet.
And people are willing to pay to go up there and he sees the same people as he travels all over the country.
Oh, really?
Last year he had trips to Australia, New Zealand. I mean, he'd stay a month in each place because he doesn't drop in one day and photograph a couple of pictures and leave. He stays for a whole month so he can see how the people live. So he started in Australia and then went to New Zealand, then to Dubai, back to Alaska, then to Faroe Islands, all in 1 year.
Wow.
And I never saw him.
That's amazing.
So, no, he's done really well. But photography, I'm a blank. I can't do anything but my iPhone is my camera.
All right. Well, thank you so much for meeting with me, and thank you for your service.
Well, it's been nice working with you. I hope that it'll be of some value to you.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, definitely.
But if you just have spare time, a lot of that stuff in that book is, I think it's just interesting reading about
Oh yeah.
how a guy lived his life.
It's fascinating.
Definitely.
How did you juggle? I'm still filming if that's okay, and we can cut it out if you don't want it. But how did you juggle? You were traveling so much with your family and your wife and kids, and you know that must
I'm
have
having
been.
trouble hearing you.
How did you juggle family life? You know, with kids at home and your wife, and you know, it sounded like you were gone quite a bit.
Well, that's the downside to a military life is
Yes.
the spouses, the wives, they really pay a big price. They really do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I know my wife had to, while I was in the Philippines, she moved from South Carolina all the way to Honolulu with an infant.
Wow.
Couldn't even, not even able to walk.
Oh my
And
goodness.
she did that all by herself. And
Wow.
I managed to arrange an apartment before she got out there, but then I had to leave her for 6 months or so.
Mm-hmm.
I got home, my son didn't even know me.
Oh, I bet.
I tried to pick up my son, he started crying.
Aw.
Oh, that's life.
Yeah, that is.
Well, you know, it's been fun with it actually brought back a lot of memories just to look over your questionnaire and some of the things that I don't have any regrets about any part of my career. I'd like to do it over.